of different rule of thumb ways of going about this process. And, usually there's thresholds, I would say. Like if you think about marketing budgets in thirds almost. So there's like a 0 to 1 velocity budget. So how do you go from a cold start to just breaking through the inertia of being able to get into the market to the point where you're not just getting whatever inbound you're going to get anyways, essentially, as a result of being a brand and being in business for some period of time. But quite literally, cold start to 1, 1 to 10, 10 to 100. If you were thinking about those kinds of tranches, if you will, the way that you might approach the rule of thumb would be slightly different. Are you investing enough to at least invest one customer's worth of revenue into your marketing budget?
All right, welcome to Business Breakthroughs. I'm here today with Dev Basu. Dev is the founder and CEO of Powered by Search, a digital marketing agency focused entirely on B2B SaaS companies. His firm is recognized, I think, as the fastest growing agency in Canada. And Dev is an encyclopedia of knowledge when it comes to marketing and lead generation strategies and execution. I think he's one of the best system thinkers I know and can communicate very complex topics in simple models and frameworks. And so I'm super happy to have you here, Dev.
Thanks for having me on. It's good to
Yeah,
hang.
yeah, absolutely. So, boy, it seems like you've had an entrepreneurial spirit from when you were just a boy. And I'm curious, what's drawn you so deep into business and marketing?
Oh, that's just a great question. I'm guessing you probably know the story of how I started my first business in high school. Okay, well, what draws me into business? I like creating things out of nothing, and I tend to be a very nonlinear type of thinker. And so the idea of someone else's constraints or boundaries like fundamentally irks me. And so I like to think kind of creatively and, quote unquote, out of the box. And I'm always thinking about like, what if this was possible? Whatever this basically is. What if this was easier and there was a different way to go about it? And I think entrepreneurship, allows a unique kind of um, kind of environment to be able to do that. 100% of your wins are
For
yours and your
sure.
team's 100% of your losses. And you completely get this as well, right?
Yeah.
And being an entrepreneur yourself.
How that nonlinear thinking, is that nature or nurture? Where'd that come from?
It's a good question. I come from a background in my family where I'm the only entrepreneur in the family.
Oh, really?
Everybody else has been in kind of very, very awesome careers overall in science and in business and in law and so on. And growing up in an Indian family, you're kind of expected to become an engineer, a doctor, or a lawyer. Um, I married an engineer in,
So you check that off?
I checked that off. I'm living vicariously through my wife, who's an industrial engineer, but
Right.
doesn't practice as one. She's a management consultant, and so she's also in the business of being able to help other companies grow. But I think what I saw was a number of folks who were very good at what they did in the family, and including my dad and my mom, who was a teacher, at that point in time. And they were good at what they did, but they had their individual kind of career ladders or rungs kind of going through it. And I think the idea of having a rate limiter of tenure and time specifically always kind of, again, I was just like, that seems somewhat artificially
Right.
constructed because what if you could make a year's worth of progress in a couple of months or a quarter or two? What if you didn't have to wait 10 years for the next level? And so, as an example, we have hired a whole bunch of people into Powered by Search recently. And I was talking to one of our new recruits on the SEO team, and I asked him what he wanted to do. And he said, I would love to be a director of this pod in 5 to 7 years. And what I mentioned to him was like, 5 to 7 years, why not in 2 years' time?
Right.
Right. And he said, I've never been asked that before. But that's precisely, I think, why I leaned into entrepreneurship, which is to challenge that norm of how long certain things take. Um, and to be able to kind of chart my own path associated with it. So probably more nurture, but
Yeah.
almost from the perspective of seeing what hard work can yield in someone else's sort of environment and looking at that and going, if I did that, but in my own way, and again, that obviously exposes to way more risk, I wonder what would happen. And good things, typically, I mean, there's been ups and downs throughout the entire journey, of course, but generally up and to the right in terms of good risk taking combined with effort kind of increases that surface area of luck, if you will.
Right,
And so
right.
that's what ended up happening.
I love the way you put that. Yeah, it's interesting that that kind of the rungs of that ladder. I had a mentor at IBM early in my career, and remember him sitting me down at lunch and kind of talking about how to frame goals and have them both time bound as well as he had the three axes. What are you going to learn? What do you need to make? And in what time frame? And at the point that his comment was at the point that you reach one of those, you're done. Move forward. Like it's, and don't let the company, in this case, IBM, dictate your path and your timing. Rather, take more direct ownership of that. I thought that was really good
I
insight.
love that. Yeah. That, I mean, it sounds like your mentor really instilled the sense of like personal accountability, and
For
ownership
sure.
over your own future, your own destiny, whatever path you wanted to kind of go down.
Yeah, at the time, I think it honestly probably came from a comment or a question to me of, what I wanted to do and when, and I probably had some really ambiguous answer. And I think that's really where, he said, no, 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 it's time for you to take control and be very intentional about where you're headed. Yeah. So, hey, you, as I understand, are currently writing a book on predictable growth, and I think a lot of small businesses approach marketing from just thinking about a set of channels or tactics that don't always align well with a sound strategy. And I'm curious, like, what does predictable growth for small business look like to you?
Yeah, good question. I mean, part of it, I think, is that it's fundamentally more difficult to buy than it is to sell. If you think about any large purchase that you've made
Yeah,
recently, think about the journey that you went through and the ups and downs, the doubts, the confusion, the buyer's remorse, the cognitive dissonance of almost pulling the trigger and then pulling back.
right,
I think in general, when you're kind of adopting this perspective of the seller's mindset, the small business mindset to acquire customers or clients, we lose empathy for what the buyer basically is going through. And that's kind of why we want to fit them into neat little channels and say, well, if we spend money on Facebook or Google ads or, so on, we think about um, leads, right? But like in some way, I think leads is dehumanizing the person on the other side of the screen.
right,
And that's why we tend to think of it in units of
mm,
numbers, like numbers on a spreadsheet, but also in terms of these channels and our channel investments, which naturally leads to this very siloed perspective that we see in businesses a lot. Um, the sales function being different than the marketing function, being different than the finance function,
right,
when it really is a business is like a living, breathing organism where all the cells in the body need to work really well together for growth to happen. And in many ways, like growth is a byproduct of the excess value you create for your customers. And so predictable growth, I think, is it's amazing, it's compounding, but it's not sexy. Right. And so it's one of those things where if you run a business for 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 25 years, you look back and like the version of your business that you have today is nothing similar to what it was
right,
in year 1 or 2 or 5 or 10, depending on how far in you are. And you've largely forgotten the amount of investment you've had to make to stand up things that you take for granted basically today. And so I think that's a nice thing about these, businesses that offer a ton of value. And I almost think the sexier the business is, the lower the total return essentially will be on
right.
that business, the more of a flash in the pan essentially can be. So I think predictable businesses deliver predictable value on a recurring basis, ideally, to their customers. And because the customers are winning, the businesses continue winning as well. So that's what I think about predictable,
Yeah, so it's
what
it's
growth looks
much
like.
more than just predictable marketing, and I love
Yes.
your
Yeah.
framing of losing sight of the kind of the journey for the buyer and being empathetic to that. And that's well, I mean, even for myself, I think, I tend to approach things fairly analytically and think about it in terms of models and a spreadsheet.
Yep.
Oftentimes you're thinking about your outreach and your audience and what that's going to look like in the funnel stage, right?
Yep.
And
Yep.
um, Yeah,
Well,
that's
I
great.
do too, by the way, Mark. Like I think like everything in terms of the way you optimize and grow, when you have the right foundation, everything is a funnel, right? And you do need to kind of think about those stage to stage conversion rates. And so you kind of gave me a nod to being a systems thinker. I'm very much a visual plus spreadsheets type of person. But
Right,
at the back of it is, okay, so how do you make this experience perfect for an N of one to get an N of many, essentially? And if you can do that, then if you can nail the entire experience for one, two, five, 10 units of customers, essentially, then you can do it for 100, you can do it for 1,000, you can do it for 100,000. But that's the bit I think that most businesses sometimes they miss and they end up getting revenue leakage, which is what drives up cost of customer acquisition. So the reason I'm writing the book is because it's the anti-growth hack book, right? It's not about the hot thing that is important right now or the channel that is important right now. I really wanted to kind of stand the test of time. And the thought behind it is go back to the fundamentals and the basics of what problem do you solve? How does it work? What alternatives do you replace? Where do your customers live? Who are they following? Where are they, what kind of peers are they funding?
right,
And then how do you get in front of them and make them an offer that they can't refuse? Um, Those are some of the kind of core working blocks, if you will,
right.
of just running a good business and getting in front of customers in a way you can actually help more of them and increase impact.
It's so good. The anti-hack in the era of abundant hacks. Everybody's talking about ways to hack, and
Yeah.
I love that approach. Um, this maybe leads into the next question that I have. I mean, I'm really intrigued by your approach to setting up systems and frameworks for kind of creating a lead gen flywheel. I'm curious if you can share insights of how small businesses can effectively create their own flywheel.
Oh yeah, good question. This I could jam with you for a long time on
I'm
this, but
sure.
my core thesis is that if you think about when you don't have a flywheel at all, when you don't have any systems whatsoever, we all know of small businesses that have, if it's retail, they got to line out the door because the product is so just darn good that it creates repeat customers and people tell other people. Like word of mouth is the oldest form of good
Right,
marketing, really, right? And so if you now want to extend that to digital businesses, online businesses, SaaS services, whatever for that matter, all businesses have some version of word of mouth and a continuum. It's not whether your product is good or bad, it's how good is your product, right? To what extent is your product useful to the intended end user,
right.
essentially. Um, and the goal, I think, as a business owner or as business leadership is always to make that a little bit better than it was yesterday. So it's to get closer to the continuum of like this product is so darn good that it just plain works at the end of the day. So in terms of creating this idea of a flywheel, the concept that I came up with was what if your product was your sales and it was also your marketing. So, in other words, if you do good work for your end audience and they have success and you have a capture mechanism about that success, like just to take a snapshot, like imagine if you had a Polaroid camera in front of um, every time a customer won and you had all these little Polaroids, stuck up on your fridge or something like that, could you take those Polaroids and effectively show them to other people who are exactly like your existing customers and say, hey, do you want this kind of success? Or do you
Right.
have these kinds of problems? And they go, yeah, I do. How do I make that happen for me? And you say, well, actually, we built this platform that does XYZ things. Would you like to try it? Right. And they say, yeah, of course I would like to try it, right? And so the product is in fact the sales, which is the marketing. Sales is one to one,
Yeah.
and marketing is one to many, but ultimately underlying it is a good product where there's a capture mechanism of being able to know when your customer is winning and to
Right.
then amplify those wins to many people who are strangers. And as they go kind of raise their hands, take those same wins in the form of testimonials, case studies, interactive demos, whatever the format basically might be. And that creates a unique kind of flywheel at the end of the
Yeah.
day. But it starts actually not with sales and marketing. It starts with the product and having an ability to listen and to watch and to capture those wins essentially happening. Does that make
Yeah,
sense on some
it
level?
makes a ton of sense. And I think I'm hearing pieces of kind of product-led growth in there, but I think you're taking it further. You're not just relying on the virality of the product, but rather
Yeah.
capturing those insights and aha moments and then utilizing those to stimulate more
Yeah.
interest.
Yeah, and I'll just maybe like contextualize it a little bit. Like you don't need a tech platform to be able to do this. So for us, what we do is we listen to the problems that incoming clients as a demand generation, agency for B2B SaaS companies, often one of the things that pops up is, hey, I have worked with an agency. I have not had a good experience with the agency. And we say, why? And they say, well, they weren't proactive. I had to always tell them what to do. I always had to stay on top of them. I wasn't sure at any point what they were doing at any given moment in time. And the way that they charge was it was misaligned from when we saw value or sought
Right,
out the value we wanted to get. Okay, so there are three different things in there. Like so the first one was they're not proactive. Okay. So we know that in any business there's going to be a bell curve of like customers who are really winning and customers who are not winning, and they're kind of a middle kind of,
right,
thick part of the bell curve where a lot of people are winning some of the times they're not. They're middling in terms of their performance. But if we had a capture mechanism, which we do, we do simple things like net promoter score surveys and things like that. We talk to clients, we jump on Zoom with them, we take little snippets of the conversations we essentially have. And every now and again, with a calibrated question, we're able to get a client to actually go, hey, so you mentioned that at the beginning of the engagement, 3 months, 6 months, 9 months ago, that you had never had a good experience with an agency that could be proactive. What's the last 6 months been like for you? And what you get is this beautiful, it depends on the format, but either a love letter or you get a segment of text or video that becomes your marketing content at the end of the day,
oh, that's really
right?
good. Yeah,
And then you take that and go, hey, would it be all right if I took that snippet or that segment, turned it into some repurposed, social media ads, stuck that on LinkedIn, and we have very specific ways of using that. And primarily, we're using it for people who have consumed our content, who are aware of who the brand, is, but have not either raised their hand. And so we have a playbook for that, but also for people who are actually engaged in speaking with us, but are likely to have those concerns. They're going like, what
right.
if these guys are just another, agency, just like the ones that I'm either evaluating right now or that I've talked to in the past. And when they see that ad pop up in their newsfeed with no call to action, and it's just quite literally low production value Zoom or whatever, and somebody's talking about the exact fear that they have from someone who's gone before them,
Right.
it tends to really feel reassuring, right? And so that's an example of like real customer results turning into marketing. But then if you package that into your sales cycle, if you're doing demo led, for example, between the demo to the point of when you share a quote or an estimate or a proposal, whatever that looks like, you just layer on these one-to-many messages of like, by the way, these are 10 questions that our clients ask us or our
Yeah,
customers ask us. And we just have little snippets here and there of stuff that you might ask us down the line. Have a look at this. And if any of it's of interest, we'll jump on and have a chat about it. It really, it takes, we have a section of our playbook called compressed time. And the idea is if you have and you can anticipate these particular questions, you can shorten the sales cycle
for
because
sure.
often what ends up happens is the customer does not know what questions to ask.
Right.
They have the questions in the back of their head, which is a feeling, but to be able to verbalize them requires effort, time, presence, focus, and attention. And what we do is we say, people exactly in your space and time at this stage of the journey ask these kinds of questions. Here are the answers. Right?
Right.
You got anything else? And they go, no, this is great. Okay, fantastic.
Yeah.
So and it just that's the process of building a flywheel.
Yeah, yeah, you're circumventing the things the path they have to go through anyway, and the questions that they have, but just being very proactive about that. And
Yeah.
and did I understand that in that bell curve? I mean, you pulling that from the folks that are kind of the raving fan portion of the bell curve. It also makes me wonder if there's not an opportunity to take that and even apply that to the belly of your bell curve, right? The
Hmm.
existing users or customers?
A great question, actually, about that and insight. You can actually apply it to both the belly, but also the left-hand portion of the bell curve as well. And, people who aren't seeing success or detractors. And often this is the idea behind like customer product fit,
Right,
essentially, right? The reality, it does take two to tango. And generally speaking, what we find is that most of the time the customer never thinks that they're wrong. They always look at the product or the service and they say, must be them, right? But if you've gone through and you've bought four or five kinds of the same kind of thing and you're the only common denominator, kind of helps to look in the mirror as well.
right,
But that's not something that people, I think the market does not typically do that. They look at when you're buying something, you're judging what you're buying, not your behavior in interaction essentially with that. So what we do with the ones which are the types of NPS scores. We don't Our NPS is pretty high, by the way. Like, our customer NPS is about 83 right now.
wow,
And
great,
so, but sometimes we see like the most common type of feedback in the early days is everything seems great, but I have not seen results yet, right? Which is okay. That's a par for the course because good marketing is a little bit like planting a garden. The day you plant the seeds is not the day you
right,
get,
right,
the fruit, if you will.
exactly,
Um, but with that being said, if there are any extreme detractors, the playbook is that becomes a customer you don't want to get anymore. So you can literally have an anti-testimonial screen to showcase to people who you want to repel away. This would be in the software context, like people who are on G2 or Capterra and have reviewed it and basically said, lovely software, but just too expensive. Great. You want to actually put that on your landing page of who it's not for. This is not for somebody who's a solopreneur or for, a business to consumer user, depending on what your kind of niche basically is, right? You can also outline who it's not for and actually quite literally paste on somebody's terrible testimonial. In fact, it makes for really good advertising if you do it sort of tastefully.
right, right. I've seen that infrequently, but I like when I see that. So, just thinking about that, concept of sowing the seeds now, and you're not going to, get to the fruit until later. I've often experienced marketers that are wishy-washy or maybe attempt to evade accountability for their work or the real measure. And as a business leader, that can be really frustrating to expect kind of the bottom line result, but receive a lot of hand waving and it depends type of responses from the team. And I'm curious, how can businesses create a better alignment around expected
Mhm.
results?
Yeah, it bothers me as well because the it depends answer is a very common one,
Yeah,
especially in anything that it's got a quantitative outcome, but the process to get there might be having creative inputs. It's very common, right? But it's also very frustrating to hear because sometimes you just want the answer to the damn question. You don't want the dancing around
yeah,
that piece. So I think the first thing is just good calibrated questions, right? So often the first question that if you're expecting a result is when can I see results? Well, it takes two to tango, where I think that question being calibrated, which is what is the first, sign of leading indicators that I could see relating to the end result that I want? Let's define what that is. And it's fine for a customer or client to say, when can I see results? But then on the consultant or the agency side or, the product CS side, you could say, well, what do you mean by a result? What kind of results matter to you? And you can use a Socratic process to be able to pull that out. And you can kind of get to what the person's really after.
right,
But usually you get to a component of like, what do you mean by results? And the second is let's agree that results are a continuum, meaning if the big shiny result you want over here is on this side, and for those of you who are listening, I'm just putting up my
yeah,
hand on one side of the screen. There are steps that need to happen before that result happens. Everything is a process at the end of the day, which would mean essentially that there are lagging indicators and there are leading indicators. The first thing is to just put those on a measurable scorecard and to say like what happens first and what happens next and what happens all the way up to the end outcome, which is quote unquote the result, the North Star
right,
result. Um, the second thing, which is less so discussed, which I think in general, most savvy business owners, operators, leaders they understand the concept of a scorecard. I don't think
Right.
that's net new at all. But everybody knows what a KPI, a key performance indicator is. Not everybody knows what a KPA or key performance action basically looks like. So that's essentially answering the question, okay, if we know what the measurables are, what are we doing that we're
Yes.
aligning on to actually move the that particular measurable in the direction that we want it to move?
Yeah.
And direction always comes before the end destination as well, right? So even in between a leading indicator, right? Look at, let's say you're running an ad of some kind. One leading indicator is just, do you have a good ad?
Right.
And the point of an ad is to get a click, if you're doing an online ad at least, or a view. It's not to sell the end product, which is something that I think business owners sometimes can get.
Oh
Um,
yeah. Too fixated on that one particular thing.
Totally, right? And they might be fixated on the cost per click, for example, as a leading indicator, when ultimately what matters is what was the cost of an actual transaction? So cost of acquisition for a specific customer or a payback period, for example. And generally, it's an education process to be able to say, wouldn't you rather have a higher quality customer going through the entire process as opposed to a lower quality customer at a lower cost per click? Because that higher quality customer will convert at a higher rate at every stage of the process to ultimately a lower cost of acquisition for a
Yeah.
customer that can lower CAC, right?
Yes.
Versus you know, if you want cheap clicks, you can go get them. There's a lot of places to get cheap clicks on the web that you probably shouldn't be spending money and time on. But that's how we would think about it, which is both, the right KPIs along this continuum of leading and lagging, and then the KPAs being crisp and clear and universally bought in.
I think I'd love to see a lot more conversation about that in business and even outside of marketing. And I'm a fan of both the EOS framework as well as Covey's four disciplines of execution. And one of the things that in Covey's model, you talk about leading indicators having two attributes. One is that they're predictive of success, and secondly, that they're influenceable. And yeah, I think that pulling it back to those things that you believe, at least through hypothesis, that is going to yield the proper outcome, allows you to at least see and be more comfortable with the progress or lack of progress versus just holding on to the lagging measure, the rearview
Mm-hmm.
mirror,
Mm-hmm.
which can be often very frustrating not to see anything for a long time.
Yeah, completely.
Yeah.
And like, in the same way that, and I couldn't agree more, this is not just in one area of business, but in all areas of business. Like when you look at your financial results for the past month or the past quarter, for example, by definition, you're looking at the rearview window. It doesn't tell
Right.
you very much about how you're going to influence the numbers for the future. It only tells you whether you're good or bad or okay compared to your desired result in the past. And so I'm a big fan of the idea that like if you're doing enough of the behaviors and the leading indicators, that it becomes unreasonable not to get
Right.
the end result, essentially. And often what ends up happening is, the baby gets thrown out with the bathwater, especially I would say in the world of marketing, where they don't get the time to fruition. It's like, it would be ridiculous to go through and let's say you have some new sod that you're putting in your backyard for grass or whatever, and then you rip it out before it ever has a chance to actually grow, right? A lawn. Most of us would not think about doing that, but in real life, or planting seeds and immediately like getting all the soil out, of course nothing's going to grow at that point in time. But we do it with marketing and with sales and really any one of these processes where I find the less the business owner or leader understands about the process, the lower their level of time horizon basically is. But we
Makes sense, I
generally tend
guess. Yeah.
to we tend to give higher or longer time horizons to things we understand better.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes total sense. Well, we all need to be better students. We need to learn more about the process so that we can be better leaders. Um, you touched on kind of the effectiveness of the spend. And I was curious, what's your thoughts on kind of rule of thumb marketing budgets? Does that make sense for a business to use rule of thumb budgeting, like a percentage of gross or
Yeah.
something like that? Or should budgets be based more on the unique criteria like um, growing objectives and predictability of the marketing flywheel? I'm just curious, like
Yeah.
how you should think about formulating your budget.
Yeah, so there's a lot of different rule of thumb ways of going about this process. And usually there's thresholds, I would say. Like if you think about marketing budgets in thirds almost. So there's like a 0 to 1 velocity budget. So how do you go from a cold start to just breaking through the inertia of being able to get into the market to the point where you're not just getting whatever inbound you're going to get anyways, essentially, as a result of being a brand and being in business for some period of time. Um, there's that budget. There's the 1 to 10 budget, and I mean these in a very sort of um, kind of directional way. So I don't mean one
Right,
to 10 million, essentially, although you could apply it and make it more
right.
literal, but quite literally cold start to 1 to 10, 10 to 100. If you were thinking about those kinds of tranches, if you will, the way that you might approach the rule of thumb would be slightly different. So in the 0 to 1, the question that we often say is, are you investing enough? And it depends a little bit on your type of sales motion and your ACVs, or annual contract values, that is.
Yep,
Are you investing enough to at least invest one customer's worth of revenue into your marketing budget? And that works very well as a rule of thumb into a demo-led environment, right? And so we often work with customers or clients who have ACVs that are 20, 50, 100, 200K, for example. And in those examples, we say on a monthly basis, are you investing enough to acquire one customer and break even on it? Because if you broke even on that one customer, and of course, there's a cycle associated with that, but let's say you have a 3-month sales cycle. Well, by the time you get to the fourth month, the month two investment that you made will yield a customer, and essentially you'll be breaking even and getting a customer on the same amount of marketing spend that you have, right? It'll catch up essentially. The
yep,
cycle will loop at that point in time. So that type of rule of thumb does work if you have a slightly higher ACV. If even if you're lower ACV and let's say you're product-led growth and you're selling something that is anywhere between like, $100 a month to $1,000 per month, no salespeople involved. It's just you buy it off the website. All you need is to increase those units, which is, are you investing enough to be able to get 10 customers or
right.
50 customers or 100 customers if it's PLG based, right? And that's the 0 to 1 measure, which is often like the construct around that thinking would be, well, if you're not even willing to bet one customer worth of revenue or 10 or 15 or 20 customers worth of revenue to begin investing in marketing, how are you hoping to compete? And you're not even at the
Right.
starting line, essentially,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
And so that's a thought starter exercise in terms of doing and that's the 0 to 1. In the 1 to 10, it starts getting into, okay, well, what kind of cost of customer acquisition do you have? What are your LTV to CAC ratios? Um, what's your payback period look like? So
Right.
how long does it take to be made to get to break even, essentially, where after that, it's basically you have like a lifetime gross profit essentially on that customer over time. Those metrics become more important. And then in the 10 to 100, it really does become what you were alluding to, which is it becomes more of a function of you are now trying to kind of grow velocity of growth faster than anything else. And so it's no longer an efficiency season. You're really trying to go for, a home run effectively. You're not, batting ones and twos anymore. At that point in time, you need to look at comparables because who else in the market is gunning for the market that particular way? And do you want to play that game? If you want to play that game, then really you can only have one North Star at that point in time, which is usually market share or share of voice. And you do need some level of being able to subsidize the cost of growth effectively because you're saying we just want to get as many customers as possible, right?
Right.
As
Right.
opposed to we want to get them profitably or sustainably or predictably, for example. That's not what you're going for. And generally, that tends to work well for companies who tend to have a very sticky product and high lifetime value. So I can think of one of our cybersecurity clients we can't name, unfortunately, very large company that's over $10 billion valuation. Um, they're just going for trying to get everything. They're trying to get every single Fortune 5000 client out there to become a customer of theirs. And it is very much a growth at all costs. I mean, A, they
Yeah.
have a lot of gunpowder, but also the other component of it is they know that these particular customers are buying a product that's got high switching costs. You're not just going to put a cybersecurity solution in and
Yeah.
move
Rip
away
it
from it
out.
after
No.
1, 2, or 3 years. In fact, their standard contract is 3 years. And so again, you can model it, you can put it on the spreadsheet and go, yes, the year one ACV to, you know, cost of customer acquisition looks out of whack. But if we're predicting that these customers are going to stick with us for 4.5 to 6 years, then it becomes actually quite palatable at that point in time. And the key
Right.
really is here's another kind of maxim around marketing budgets. If you are serving a customer segment where once a customer buys a product, they're just out of the market for a while. And by a while, I mean 6 months, a year, 2 years, for example. That effectively reduces the number of customers in your addressable market by one, two, three, four, five, essentially. So depending on what you're selling, there are cases where the marketing budget should support trying to get as many of those customers as fast as possible because you are literally taking chips off the table in the
Yes.
market.
Yeah.
And therefore a competitor cannot conquest in at that point in time.
There's a lot of good stuff in there. This is why up front I said that you're great at taking complex things and making them simple in models. Um, yeah, there's a lot in there that I want to unpack. I guess it's also predicated on the assumption of, or the fact that is the company trying to grow? Are they trying to remain stable? Right, and that shapes a lot of that.
Hmm.
Um, and I guess, where I came to this question, I was just thinking about our own business. If you have a cost to acquire that pencils well with the lifetime value, whatever ratio you decide, it's 4 to 1 or whatever,
Hmm.
and you can meet or beat that, for a growing company, it's just like, well, how do I find more money? I mean, we'll just do that all day long, right? Let's
Hmm.
continue to just put more fuel in there. But that's not necessarily the case for all businesses. Um, yeah. Anyway, just that's interesting, and I like how you put all that together, like those maxims of 0 to 1 and so on. That's super helpful.
I mean, that
Where,
just kind of considers the new business side of things, right? Like new
yeah,
acquisition. But I think if let's say if you're listening to this and you have a customer value that's lower for whatever reason, right? Maybe you're high volume, low customer value. What I find most businesses don't focus on is any level of expansion revenue and win back revenue as
right,
well. I mean, whenever we think revenue, for some reason, leaders tend to think about it as
new,
net new customers,
yeah,
but expanding, retaining, and winning back are three core areas that are there's a gold mine basically over there. And I think one of the travesties that we are hoping to solve for is marketing is typically not used to address any of those areas. It's almost
right,
entirely on net new. When there are people in your email list and your database that have been latently consuming your stuff and haven't raised their hands, and all they need is a well-timed message, which is trigger based off the stuff that they're already doing. Or if you have happy customers who've been buying one level of your plans, well, could you use some marketing, including some just strategy, frankly, because the actual emails are quite straightforward and simple to make them an offer to say, hey, because of the fact that you've been using our stuff for X number of years and you have Y number of users, did you know that we have these other features that you could be using in a next level plan? We could enroll you in a 30-day trial for that, so that you even de-risk the ability to get started. And then because they're a high NPS customer that's stuck around for a long time, the propensity for them to convert into that higher upgraded plan are very high at that point in time. So again, like these offers are usually not made. And so those are some areas to think about bolstering the
yeah.
revenue as well as the value of each customer rather than only thinking about net new.
I think that's great advice, and agree with you wholeheartedly. I'm thinking about the kind of your 0 to 1, 1 to 10, 10 to 100 framing. Where does brand awareness marketing fit into that mix? And is there a certain company size or evolutionary stage where brand marketing should be introduced?
Hmm.
And I guess thinking about the measurement of it, it can be very abstract to measure, but do you ultimately measure it based upon its effect on lead generation marketing and the ability to buy down the cost? And is that the only way to look at that?
Yeah, I think there's two ways of looking at brand. Maybe three ways. So there's a way of measuring it overall, which is marketing efficiency ratio. So rather than doing this sort of channel bucketing of like, what am I doing? What's my ROI from Google or from Facebook or from other places, from events and so on? You just look at your total trailing growth in terms of revenue in comparison to your marketing spend. And you get a very clear revenue multiple effectively on that and say, okay, well, for every dollar that we spend in overall marketing, understanding that marketing, that dollar is a composite number, is our revenue ratio going up or down basically over time? And understanding that nobody buys just from one channel, like anymore, at least I
Right.
would say. I would say your behavior buying and my behavior buying is, we tend to have multiple touch points with anything that we do buy that's of a discretionary purchase size, right? Now, if it's a non-discretionary purchase, like it's a $10 thing off Amazon, right? $20 thing off an Instagram ad. If it's a sandwich offer you get on DoorDash or something like that, that's a different type of purchase. But for all considered purchases, which is true for most B2B businesses, the touch points just need to be higher, right?
Yeah.
And so I think just keeping that in mind, you can get together and start investing more in that process,
That's a great distinction between the considered purchase versus these other more transactional purchases. I mean,
right?
I think that's a great way to look at that. I want to shift gears just a little bit as we're kind of wrapping up here. I want to focus in on Dev the leader a bit. You've built a great organization. For those listening, it's a fully distributed organization where Dev is finding the best of the best, regardless of where they happen to sit, and has it created a very functional model and culture for the business. And um, you just returned from a meditation retreat, and I'm curious, how does meditation fit into your life, and how do you apply that to being a better, more functional leader?
Mm, I love that question. So I think the key that I think about is two things. One is how can I be as helpful and useful to everybody around me as possible? And anyway, it doesn't always have to be financial or not. Um, and it's hard to be able to do that if you're not mindful of, and I don't just kind of say mindfulness as a topic because you always have to be mindful of something, right? And so like when we're doing this right now, I'm 100% here. I'm not thinking about my next thing. I'm not thinking about the phone over here or the notification over there.
Right.
To be all in, and I think Nike kind of gets it when they say just do it, right? It is very much that when you're just driving, drive, when you're talking, talk, when you're writing, write. It seems so simple, but because I think the mind is this monkey mind of always thinking about the future or being trapped in the past or thinking about the present moment and the competing projects and things like that that draw us in different directions. I find meditation to be a grounding experience where you can just kind of come back and be like, okay, well, the one of the cool things is I'm alive,
Right.
which is you take that for granted. And like I'm on this planet that is one of, as far as we know, the only ones in the universe so far that we've discovered that's capable of having the vibrancy of life that we have right now. And it's not, I don't think that it's I don't really, go into the woo or anything like that, for example, but the meditation retreat allows me to zoom out and basically just remember these very core things that allow us to do the things we do, to enjoy just the blue sky or the the amazing sort of conversation that you can have with people, to be curious and learn about them and what they're
Yeah.
doing and what their hopes and aspirations basically are. And to do that in a very grounded fashion that is not frenetic, it's not grasping, it's not rushing, it's not trying to move on to the next thing. And so that's something I really enjoy. And it allows me to show up 100% for the people that I want to serve, to seek to serve. And I think that, you know, business can be a force for good, I think, at the end of the day. And as I kind of mentioned earlier in the conversation, we only get paid because we're creating more value than we capture. Otherwise, you don't get paid for very long. And that's that can only happen, I think. The best companies are the ones who realize that. A friend of mine says this. He's got a quote that says that recurring revenue is a function of recurring impact, and it's very
It's really
hard
good.
to yeah. Um, is Jocko van der Kuig from Winning by Design said that particular quote, and he he was talking about this, and I said, you're absolutely right, and part of that, I think, tying it back to mindfulness is how can you possibly have consistent, predictable, intentional impact if you're not mindful? If you're
Right.
scatterbrained and you're fragmented in 1,000 different directions, it's super hard to do. And I think the
Yeah.
world is one where we're engineered to actually be scatterbrained and pulled
Right.
in 1,000 different directions. So
Right.
it's helpful sometimes, just at least for me personally, to come back and be grounded in the breath and in mindfulness. And that's what meditation retreats do for me, and just the practice of meditation.
I think it's just getting more and more challenging too. I mean, we're just bombarded with inputs, and yeah, I mean, one of the things that I really appreciate about you is that ability to be present and be um, fully engaged. And yeah, all of our interactions have been that way, and hence why I have so much admiration for you.
Well, right back at you. I think it's been the similar experience for me as well. And I would just say that, like, whether you have a meditation practice or not, being fully present and to be giving of yourself and your attention to another human, uh, it's simpler and it's better.
It is.
It's less work than it is to think about 1,000 different things and try to do one of these types of conversations well, right? And and hopefully that kind of resonates with whoever listens to this, and you get some benefit out of it as well
Yeah,
for carving out an hour of your time listening to this. And yeah, I would just say that whether it doesn't, the practice is ultimately doesn't matter, because it's the actions and the way that we show up that matters. And in my faith, we call it karma. But your karma actually is like all you leave behind at the end of the day. It's just your actions.
that's great. That's a great place to leave this. Dev, where can people find more about Powered by Search and more about Dev Basu?
Yeah, so right now, LinkedIn is definitely my jam. You can certainly stop by the Powered by Search website, poweredbysearch.com. You're going to opt in to Predictable Growth, the book. Predictablegrowth.com is the website for there. But I'm on a path right now to publish and teach everything I know on LinkedIn. And so if you Google my name or look me up on LinkedIn, I'd love to connect with you over there and have a conversation and see, if or how we might be able to help in any way, shape, or form.
That's awesome. I'll attest to the content that you provide in LinkedIn is amazing. It's consistent, very insightful, and people should pick that up for sure because there's just daily value you're distributing there. So, Dev,
Thank
thanks
you
so
so much.
much. This has been fantastic. Really appreciate the time.
Oh, it's been such a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me on.